Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us, our virtual community town open house tonight for the East Area Plan. This is our first time trying this, and maybe for many of you, the first time to join a meeting this way. So I'm glad we can experiment together. My name is Liz Weigel. I'm a senior city planner with Denver's Department of Community Planning and Development. And I am joined tonight by a number of our team members who are here to speak and answer questions that come up. And that includes Kurt Upton, Sarah Showalter, Irene Aguilar, Melissa Toddy, Brian Billings, Mike Gill, and Stephen Riho. And please forgive me if you hear my son in the background. He might be trying to interrupt at points. So just to cover what I shared with many of you as you got onto the meeting, we do want to make this as interactive as possible, and we have a question and answer box, and you can enter questions at any time throughout the meeting. You should see that panel on the right side of your screen. It says Q&A at the top. You can type in there and hit send at any moment, anytime throughout the meeting, and send that to us. If you happen to not see that screen, you can click on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, where you will see a circle with a question mark in it. Press that and it should open the panel. If you press the three dots at the bottom as well, that could open up other options if you happen to not see the question mark. We are recording the meeting tonight, and we will post it on the website afterwards. So if you can't stay for the whole meeting, or if you know of your neighbors who weren't able to attend, you can send them to the website to see that. We also are going to try to get to as many questions as possible tonight. Those we don't get to, we will put on our website and answer all questions, and you will be able to find them there. Just a quick overview of tonight's agenda. We will give you an overview of the East Area Plan and the updates that we've made since October, when we last put out draft recommendations. And then we will go into questions and answers. We received about 50 questions ahead of time. Thank you to people who sent those in ahead of time. So first we'll go through some of those, and then we'll open it up to the live questions. And then we'll end with next steps. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Showalter. She's our Director of Planning Services, to say a few opening remarks. But before I do that, I just wanted to also thank the council members, Councilwoman Sawyer and Councilman Herndon, who are joining us tonight. Thank you for being here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Liz. Good evening, everybody. Like Liz said, my name is Sarah Showalter, and I'm the Director of Planning Services for Community Planning and Development. We're really testing the limits of a virtual platform tonight, so really appreciate everybody being patient and flexible as we work on this new technology together. We have a lot of information to share with you, and we know there are a lot of questions. Liz has explained how we'll be using the Q&A function if you're joining the meeting from a computer. If you're not joining from a computer, we don't get to your questions. As she mentioned, there's a lot of other ways to make sure your questions get to our team. You can definitely call or email us at any time. Phone numbers and email addresses are available on our website. Before we get started, I think it's really important to acknowledge everyone who's been battling this pandemic head on. I know a lot of us have dealt with major changes in our lives. For me personally, I'm a parent, so I've been figuring out what it means to work from home with young kids while they're also trying to do school, and how to balance childcare and a full-time job. I know a lot of parents are doing the same out there, so kudos to all of you for holding down the fort. But we also know that there's a lot of people dealing with far more serious and stressful issues than just childcare. There are people dealing with loved ones who are sick, job losses, food and housing insecurity, a lot of challenges. And we're going to give Irene Aguilar a few minutes on our team to talk about some of the resources that are available for people who may need assistance. I'll turn it over to Irene.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome this evening, everyone. And I know there are other things on your mind, and so we did want to let you know that if you go to our website, you'll find a copy of this information sheet that gives you some of the types of resources that are available. And actually, we do have on our DenverGov website, denvergov.org/COVID-19, always updated information and resources. The short sheet on the East Area Plan will tell you some about what the guidelines are as we start our reopening this week, and will also give you access to numerous resources that we have, both for individuals who might be experiencing issues with housing or with food access, and also for businesses. We are in our second round at Denver Economic Development and Opportunity of reviewing applications for our Business Support Fund, and we expect to have this going on over the next several months as federal funding comes in. So thank you for attending this meeting, and please do not hesitate to reach out if there are any needs that you're having trouble meeting, and we will do our best to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. So just a few other remarks, and then we'll dive into the real content for this evening. Really just wanted to highlight that more than ever, because of this pandemic, we need plans and policies that promote equity, support the health of our residents and our planet, keep communities connected to the services that they need, and address the short and long-term economic challenges that the city will be facing in the wake of the COVID pandemic. The draft East Area Plan that we're talking about tonight is the result of nearly 3 years of community conversations, as many of you know because you've been very involved in those conversations. This includes public workshops, pop-up events, meetings with registered neighborhood organizations, focus groups, and lots of online options. The draft that we are discussing has been shaped by an enormous amount of community input, most importantly over the last year, as multiple community groups worked closely with our staff to refine the recommendations into a draft plan that's more inclusive and more innovative than when we had started. We're at a critical point in Denver, and we have some really important policy recommendations in this draft plan. Each of the neighborhoods represented in the plan need the improvements we've been working on together to help make an impact on housing affordability, to reduce the number of scrapes and demolitions we're seeing in our neighborhoods, to add traffic calming measures that will help support our neighborhoods, recommend the policies and programs that can help prevent involuntary displacement for both residents and businesses, and so much more. The draft will be available through at least July 1st for everyone to ask questions about what's in it and see where your input over the past years has been reflected. We will be available by phone, by email, in virtual meetings, and as social distancing allows, in small groups. We're very, very committed to getting as much input as we can on this draft and hearing your thoughts about all the recommendations. You will still have time, even after this draft, to review a revised draft. So really wanted to highlight those points. Thank you again to everybody for participating this evening. And I'm going to turn it over now to Kurt Upton.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. This is Kurt Upton. I'm one of the planners working alongside Liz on preparing the East Area Plan. Thank you all again so much for taking the time to participate tonight and continuing to stay engaged. So here, I just want to give a reminder, since it's been a while, that the map and the boundaries that you see here of where we're focused on what is the East Area Plan. So in the center is Colfax Avenue, and these are the 4 neighborhoods that border East Colfax on the north and south sides between Colorado Boulevard and Yosemite Street. And I think, Liz, you need to pass me the ball. Great, thank you. And so before we get started, we are going to do a quick poll because as many of you have done in the past, if you've gone to one of our in-person meetings, we try to get a sense of who we're reaching and who's in the room. So we're going to pause here for just a minute. You should see a box pop up on your screen with a poll. and so just push one of those buttons on if you live in one of the neighborhoods or in the East area, or if you live outside of the East area, and we'll let everyone take that poll. So we'll pause here for a second.
And just a tip, if you won't see that poll, obviously, if you're only calling in. And if you don't see it on your screen right now, it's also an option if you, in the toolbar at the bottom, if you click the 3 dots, then you can open the polling panel if that didn't pop up for you. So we'll give everybody just a minute or so to answer that question. Okay, we're getting close. We have about 150 participants, so we're getting close to everybody answering that. So just give you all about 10 more seconds. Okay. Looks like not everyone's gotten to it, but we're pretty close. So we'll just go ahead and close that. I'll share those results with everybody. So you should be able to see that on your screen. Looks like our highest participants are from South Park Hill tonight. Okay, thank you.
Great.
Go ahead, Kurt.
Okay. Thanks everyone for filling that out. And looks like, yeah, we do have quite a few residents here tonight. So thanks again. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. And so Sarah touched on the process previously, but just want to spend a couple of more minutes on the process. So we have been working on the East Area Plan now for almost 3 years. Started back in the summer of 2017. We did a series of community workshops and events, culminating in now over 100 meetings and events up to this point with over 5,000 participants. And so a very robust process. And we have done a lot of work trying to listen and incorporating that feedback into the recommendations. And we've done several iterations of those recommendations before we've got to the draft plan recommendations. So we're here at the end of the slide bar. So we're getting ready to wrap up the process. But we do have this draft plan that is open for community input. And as Sarah mentioned, we'll also be preparing a second draft plan once we've reviewed all the comments that are provided on this draft plan. We have heard some concerns, obviously, with the challenges going on right now with COVID-19 and some difficulty in folks providing comments or being able to spend time taking a look at the draft plan and providing meaningful input. And so we have made the decision to extend the comment period on this draft to July 1st. Initially, we were going to close it at the end of this month, but we have made that decision based on some feedback we've received that people would like a little more time to provide input. I will just re-emphasize that there are recommendations in the plan that we think are even more important to move forward in an expeditious way now that we're facing this pandemic. We have priorities in the plan that help small locally owned businesses. Many of our small locally owned businesses are suffering pretty significantly currently. We have some very important recommendations to help people struggling with affordable housing. We have other recommendations that are intended to help the healthcare sector and provide healthcare employees with more affordable housing options. So there's a number of recommendations that we believe are really important to move forward and are even more important in some ways than they were before this pandemic. So we do believe that we need to keep moving forward and complete the plan in a reasonable time period. This is just a reminder that the East Area Plan is what we call a small area plan as part of the Neighborhood Planning Initiative. And there are plans that provide guidance at the citywide level that have already been adopted, and those were called Blueprint Denver and Comprehensive Plan 2040 and other citywide plans. And so the role of a small area plan is to provide some customized recommendations for those citywide goals and recommendations as they apply to the unique conditions in certain neighborhoods. And also, as a reminder, plans are not regulations themselves. So we get this question a lot of how is my property's zoning going to be changed? And that's not the role of an area plan to specifically change zoning on individual properties. A plan is a guiding document. It's an advisory document. It provides some broad recommendations on how the neighborhoods in the plan area will evolve over the next 20 years and trying to guide those changes in a way that benefits the community. And that includes guidance for future regulatory decisions such as rezoning cases, but they are not regulatory changes themselves. That will be a separate process that will involve community input and much more detailed analysis. So how we start an area plan is to develop a vision. And so think of the vision as kind of the long-term outcomes that we're intending to achieve. And by long-term, we typically mean about 20 years out. And so the general vision for the East area, based on what we've heard from the community members, is people really like the idea of Colfax being a Main Street pedestrian-friendly place and a destination where it's easy and safe to access it, and our neighborhoods themselves being inclusive and a place where a wide range of families and other residents can live and work. And our plans are comprehensive, and so these little icons that you see are representative of the various topics that we cover in the plan. And so we cover everything from affordable housing to urban design and historic preservation, mobility, whether that's bike lanes, sidewalks, crossings, and transit, small businesses, how we're helping people access jobs, quality jobs, environmental issues such as climate change, parks and open space, and how we create healthy and active neighborhoods through things like grocery stores and ways to reduce violent crime. So with that, I'm going to touch on just some of the highlights of the priority recommendations that are in the plan. We have a number of recommendations. These are not going to be all of them that I'll be presenting, but these have kind of risen to the top based on our analysis and of community input that we've received throughout the process. And the first has to do with addressing residents who are at risk of involuntary displacement. And that's both people living in the area and people who have small businesses in the area. And this is a priority that we've heard throughout the East Area Plan, but it's in particularly the very top priority that we've heard in the East Colfax neighborhood itself for a variety of reasons. One of them being that many residents in the East Colfax neighborhood are vulnerable to involuntary displacement. And so our priority recommendation is to help these residents and small businesses stay in the community long term by connecting them to resources and making more housing options available and affordable to families and individuals. And there's some specific recommendations that we go into on how we'll achieve this in the plan. One is to prioritize existing residents and existing small businesses, particularly locally owned independents and mom and pops, with resources to help them stay long term, whether that be finding them a more affordable place with new affordable housing coming online, or by connecting them to resources we may have to help small businesses. Another recommendation we're making is to create a community hub in the East Colfax neighborhood that provides a comprehensive a range of services to help residents and small businesses in the area, and that's things like financial empowerment, recreation for young folks, and small business assistance. Our other recommendation, which is related to that, is to ensure the East Area is an inclusive place long into the future by increasing the amount of affordable housing using all available tools that we have at our disposal. Participants who have previously attended these meetings will remember some of the data we've provided on affordability in the East Area, but I want to touch on just two pieces of data that we've collected through this process. One is that over 4,000 households in the East Area, or about 1/3 of all the households in the East Area, are currently cost burdened. And so that, by that definition, they're spending more than 30% of their household budget on housing. And that's one of the measures that we use, as well as everyone in the United States that looks at affordable housing uses to determine whether a place is affordable or not. And so that's a big number. 1 out of every 3 households is now struggling to pay for their rent or their mortgage. And secondly, there's quite a few households in the East Area today that are at risk of involuntary displacement. And so for those reasons, we believe that increasing the amount of affordable housing in the East Area is particularly important. Next is to make Colfax Avenue a street that brings people together. It's been long known that East Colfax has been a challenging place, particularly for pedestrians. There are a number of residents who have told us that they just don't feel comfortable on East Colfax. And so we have a variety of recommendations ranging from street improvements to urban design and other ways to make sure that Colfax is a vibrant place in the future. And that includes retaining the things that people love about Colfax today, and that's retaining some of the quirky businesses, the unique buildings that may or may not be historic, and in particularly retaining its local independent character with small businesses. Also related to urban design is to make sure that the residential neighborhoods in the area remain a vibrant, preserved place of great architecture, and that the character of those neighborhoods is retained. And we'll do that by putting in incentives for preserving houses. We've seen a number of neighborhoods deal with scrapes or demolitions of older homes and being replaced by some homes that some view as being out of character and not a good fit. And so we're changing regulations and creating incentives to preserve houses as these neighborhoods evolve. And we also want to up the bar for design for new buildings. And this is both commercial buildings that may border residential neighborhoods, as well as new homes themselves, and making sure that that architecture fits in well with the historic character. And then lastly, we have recommendations to add open space and preserve trees and beautify our neighborhoods with green infrastructure, which means landscaping that's integrated with stormwater management. And we also have a big recommendation for the Mayfair Town Center. And so the Mayfair Town Center, for those who aren't familiar with that location, is south of Colfax along Primaria, where there's a King Soopers and a Safeway. And that's a strategic area because it's one of the only places with really large properties that provide an opportunity to add new open space. It's also one of the most flood-prone areas in the East Area, and many neighborhoods experience flooding in the East Area. And so for those reasons, we think that's a strategic opportunity to acquire property and create a new public park in the Mayfair Town Center. And we have some recommendations on how we'll go about doing that. And along with infrastructure, we have quite a few recommendations for transportation infrastructure. in improving mobility. And the top priority is to make our streets safer and more convenient for walking, bicycling, and using transit. Many of the streets in the East area are some of the most dangerous in terms of crashes and injuries and fatalities, and we've mapped those locations. We've also heard from the community that the streets parallel to Colfax, so that's 13th, 14th, and 17th, are of particular importance because a lot of people cross those, or children cross those to access schools and parks, and there's speeding issues and unsafe driving conditions there today. And so those rose to the top for priorities of making those streets, again, 13th, 14th, and 17th, much safer to cross and travel along. Quebec has also been a topic of conversation that has long been a street that has needed improvements, and so we've recommended some infrastructure improvements on Quebec as well. Okay, so that concluded my overview, and now we're going to pivot into the question and answer section. I've seen a number of you have been submitting questions, and just want to do a reminder that the question button is the question mark, and if you don't see that for some reason, to click the three little dots, and you should see the question mark button to submit questions.
So one of the, I think Kurt touched on first was one of the big ones, what were the updates made in the draft, and so I think we wanted to just spend give a few updates on those. You can also, on our website, and we have a screenshot here, but if you go to our website, you can download an overview of community feedback and updates. So there is a more detailed document on the website where you can read about what was changed since the October recommendations based on community feedback.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Back to Kurt.
Thanks for that reminder, Liz. So yeah, before everyone starts putting in some questions, we have heard a number of questions before tonight, and so we have made a lot of updates over the past several months. One of the big topics of conversations has been building heights, and so we do have an updated building height map that's on pages 31 through 33 of the draft plan document, which you can access online. I'll go through some of the updates we made to the height map. So one of the things that is important to know when you're looking at this height map is all of these different colors, for the most part, show the existing heights today. So not how much, how tall the buildings are today, but how much the zoning allows today. The only exception to that is the properties that are outlined in the dark black. The properties that are outlined in the dark black are those that are recommended for some additional height, only if community benefits are provided. And the top community benefit, again, that I've mentioned previously, is the need for affordable housing. The one exception that we've made to that has been in the Mayfair Town Center, which I mentioned previously. We think the top community benefit in that area should be a public park. And so we have listened to feedback. There was mixed opinion on whether we went too far on some of the earlier drafts of this map, or we didn't go far enough, and we tried to balance both of those opinions. There's quite a few number of properties that have been identified to be preserved at their current zoning, and some that meet several characteristics that we think are appropriate for more height. So that is lot size, and particularly what we call lot depth. So the ability for a project to build up, but also provide a sensitive transition down to a lower height of adjacent residences and provide a nice setback. There's also other criteria we've used, such as distance to proposed BRT stations and what some of the surrounding character is. So I encourage everyone to, take a look at this map if you're interested in building heights, and provide some specific feedback on what you think we should change in the next draft. Next is neighborhood housing options. So this is, how do we integrate new housing into residential neighborhoods? And we heard a number of common themes with this draft recommendation over the past several months. And one was that we initially had some areas identified adjacent to Colfax and adjacent to Colorado and in some other locations in the East area where we thought new housing options were more appropriate. We heard from a lot of folks that they kind of felt singled out and that maybe everyone should be able to sort of sprinkle in or integrate more housing and not just certain blocks within the East area. And there's other points of view that thought, well, why should we limit this to only certain blocks? Maybe more people should be able to have this opportunity. So we took out that map and we applied the recommendation for new housing options equally to all the neighborhoods in the East area. We also heard that we don't want to only single out the East area, kind of similar to the concern with just a few blocks, and that we don't want to try to sort of funnel growth only into one area of the city. And so we have also made a recommendation that this that this integration of new housing options should not just occur in the East area. In fact, this should be done through a citywide process that writes the same rules that apply throughout the entire city. So every neighborhood should be looked at the same time when these regulations are written and should be implemented through a citywide process and not just in the East area, not just in one neighborhood. We've also added recommendations to include design rules with this integration. So if new housing options are added, that they fit in well with quality design and sensitive standards that don't allow those new houses to sort of pop out and have a juxtaposition in character. We've also clearly stated that while we do recommend integrating new housing options into these neighborhoods, that single unit areas should not completely change into something that isn't single unit. And so we've explicitly said that single unit areas should remain primarily single unit. There's a lot of people who were concerned that we heard from that thought we were completely eliminating single unit zoning, and that's not the intention. And so we clarified that this is integrating new units and not completely eliminating single unit character from these neighborhoods. And we've also added in guidance for a number of other issues that residents have raised. One being preservation of older homes. We don't want tear downs to occur as a result of these new housing options. We want to preserve those older homes, encouraging home ownership and not just rentals, and assistance for current residents. So how can I, as a homeowner, maybe I've owned a home for a long time and I'd like to add another unit, maybe for a family member or maybe for myself. How do I take advantage of these policies and not just, this concern about others moving in and taking advantage of it? And there's some other issues too around street parking and stormwater that we've also put into those recommendations. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that updated policy language. And then the third and the last topic that we received a lot of feedback on was anti-displacement. And we've had a lot of constructive conversations, particularly with residents in the East Colfax neighborhood, on how we might strengthen our initial recommendations to help support residents and small businesses at risk of displacement. And we've added those priorities to the East Colfax neighborhood section. Okay, now I think we're at the Q&A section, I believe. So here's another reminder that if you want to submit questions, please press the question box. And if you don't see that, press the three little dots. I think, Liz, am I turning it over to you now?
Yes, thank you, Kurt, for that overview. Just a reminder to everybody that you can submit your questions through that question and answer box. As I mentioned at the start of the meeting, we did receive about 50 questions ahead of time that we're going to just touch on now, and then we're going to jump into the live questions we're receiving. And any that we don't get to tonight, we will be updating our FAQs and putting those on the website. So we will answer all questions that we receive. So we're going to start, and maybe we don't spend too much on this because I think Kurt just touched on this. We received a lot of questions about the new housing options in the neighborhoods. So I'll just read a couple of the questions we got ahead of time. One is, we got this from Bill, where does the plan allow for new infill housing and accessory units? I think there was some confusion about whether we were restricting accessory units to only small areas. From another participant, why are single-family homes not part of the housing discussion? These neighborhoods have significant charm, and it's important to preserve the character and architecture of the neighborhood. Another participant asking any chance of upscaling away from single-family housing for all of Denver, not just the East area. And then lastly, why are we trying to increase density at all costs? What is the actual plan for affordable housing? So Kurt, maybe you just want to touch on those briefly. You presented quite a bit on this already, so just maybe you want to add a few things.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that we're trying to take a thoughtful and balanced approach to this issue. I mean, there are opinions that range across the spectrum on how we should go about integrating new housing into neighborhoods, and we've tried to listen carefully to all of those perspectives. And we think the draft recommendation we've put forward is a good one that balances both concerns about preserving the existing attributes of these neighborhoods that people really love, as well as making them more inclusive places with new housing options that provide for a range of different types of families. And so, yeah, I think, you know, I don't want to reiterate some of the things that I've already said. So we can move on with other questions, and we may get into more specifics.
Yeah, and I would just add that there are, aside from the new housing options recommendation, we do have a number of recommendations for affordable housing, and you can find those on page 45 of the plan. So there are a number of strategies for preserving existing affordable housing, helping vulnerable residents, and creating new affordable housing. So please take a look at those and give us your input. So I will go to the next question. And this one, we had a participant ask about how do you consider climate resiliency in implementing all parts of this plan, not just the quality of life section. And then another question about some of the open space recommendations. How do we get, Adele asked about how we get funding for permanent community gardens. How can we look at ways to protect open and green spaces, and integrating more native plants and open spaces along some of our parkways. So I think I'm going to take this one. And I would just say that climate resiliency is a key goal in the city's comprehensive plan and also the vision that we heard from the community for the East area. Many of our plan recommendations support these goals. This includes encouraging more opportunities for people to live close to transit, infilling our expected growth in places where we already have infrastructure. Without these types of opportunities, growth may continue to happen outside of Denver, maybe in greenfield areas or where people need to drive further to get to work. We have a number of recommendations about making it easier for people to walk, ride a bike, use transit, so they don't need to rely on their cars as much and add to our emissions. A number of our recommendations are about encouraging the reuse of buildings, which can save some on energy when we already have great buildings that exist. And also protecting our neighborhoods from flooding, integrating green infrastructure and new parks, and reducing our impervious area. So we do believe that all of our recommendations support our goals for climate resiliency. And then with regard to open space, we do have 14 recommendations for parks and open space. As Kurt touched on, there's the new park at Mayfair Town Center, but we also do encourage creating more community gardens, enhancing our existing parkways, and also creating new contemporary parkways, which are those streets that are more comfortable for walking and have more landscaping and green infrastructure integrated into them. So I will move on now to the next question. And this one is, we have received a number of questions that were related to sort of the bus rapid transit project. I think probably many people are familiar with. and traffic on neighboring streets. So a few of these questions were a participant asked just what the definition is for a future high capacity station. What does that mean? What are we anticipating seeing in the future? And David asked about what traffic studies have been performed, and this will dump traffic onto 13th, 14th, and 17th. And Tom also asked what those plans are for slowing down traffic on the parallel streets to Colfax. And then Michaela just had some questions about parking and making sure that we're addressing that in the plan, and concerns that we will rely on people taking the bus. So with this one, I think I'm going to give it to Kurt briefly, and then we do have members of our from our Transportation and Infrastructure Department who can add on to that response.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, and I'll turn it over to the transportation team, but I just wanted to just touch on parking. Parking is something that we've heard quite a bit about, and again, it's one of those issues that people have mixed opinions on. We do have several recommendations in the plan to help address street parking in particular, and making sure that it's well managed and it's available for both businesses and residents into the future. And so we have a number of different strategies on how we're addressing that issue, and it is something that we have responded to in the draft plan, and we can follow up with some specifics if needed on that. But I'll turn it over to our transportation team in answering some of the other ones.
Thanks, Kurt and Liz. This is Mike Gill, and I'm the project manager for the Colfax VRT project. And we are actively in procurement now for a consultant for the next phase of the project, which is the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, clearance phase, as well as initial preliminary design. So when we look at what the stations will be along Colfax, the locally preferred alternative that's moving forward at this point is a center running BRT with center station platforms. Those platforms would have amenities such as shelters, seating, potentially fare payments, or things along those lines. But the details of those stations have not been worked out yet. That's what this next phase will look at, is what's the size, access to them. Accessibility is key for all of our citizens. For anyone that has mobility challenges or things along those lines, that we definitely will make sure that those are accessible. So the designs will be fleshed out further on as we move into the next phase of the project. And as part of that project, there will be a formal public outreach process, including working groups and public outreach. Brian, do you want to fill in more, or Ryan?
This is Ryan Billings with Dottie. I'm a transportation planner. Not a whole lot to add to that. Obviously, we've spent the last 8 years now in the planning phase, examining all options and alternatives for what transit will look like. We're now at that phase, as Mike mentioned, of moving this into design. We have a preferred alternative, being the center running, and now's the opportunity to really dig in and finally answer a lot of the questions that we've had over the last couple of years related to design and everything else. So we're excited about that, and we're excited to move this project forward.
Great. And then I think this is Steven. I'm also a transportation planner with Dottie. To speak to the other question about some of the parallel corridors and how we'll implement some traffic calming there. Traffic calming can be a lot of different things, but effectively ways that we can both slow the traffic that exists on current streets and perhaps limit the number of cars that are passing on some of those streets. So while there are a lot of examples in the plan of what those diverters could look like, I think a good example is some of the temporary closures that we've done across the city in response to COVID. While those are temporary barriers, kind of construction style closures, they're an example of one type of traffic calming where you reduce the amount of traffic and slow some of those traffic speeds. And so we've really looked into a lot of opportunities for those sorts of things on parallel corridors.
Okay, thank you for answering those questions. I think we're going to now move to questions that we're receiving during the meeting. And for those of you that had sent in questions ahead of time, as I mentioned, If we didn't get to your questions or we don't get to them today, we will be providing an updated FAQ document and answering all the questions we receive. And just a reminder that you can use the Q&A box on your screen to send us questions. And I'm going to throw this over to Jason Morrison and Scott Robinson from our team who have been monitoring the Q&A, and they can start to ask us some of the questions that we've been receiving. Thanks. Oh.
Great. Thank you, Liz. Thanks, Liz. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Morrison, and I'm Senior City Planner with this project team. And as Liz mentioned, myself and Scott Robinson will be asking our panelists as many of your questions as we can this evening. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. And this first question, I think I'm going to go ahead and send to Liz. We're seeing a lot of questions about environmental resiliency, and this is really resonating with a lot of folks. So I was hoping you could maybe talk a little bit more about how potential open spaces were identified in the area plan, and does the city ever use funding to preserve open space and land, and also turn that into community gardens and native plant gardens?
Great. We did an analysis at the beginning of this process with regard to open space about the areas where we see that lacking today, so people who don't have a short walk to an existing open space. And some of that happens in the Montclair neighborhood and in the South Park Hill neighborhood. So the plan does prioritize trying to find places to have new open spaces there. We do think that the Mayfair Town Center provides a key opportunity because it also overlaps with where we have a major flooding problem. And so that's why we wanted to be very clear in the updates with the plan that that is a priority to try to achieve an open space in that area. We also do have recommendations, again, about preserving community gardens that we already have today and creating new ones. It's also a way to make sure that we have healthy food access, which is lacking in many places in the East area. And lastly, we do also have a recommendation for the East Colfax neighborhood, specifically around a recreation center. And that's something we heard loud and clear from community input of kind of lacking some of those recreation opportunities in that neighborhood. And we do, this plan will be a policy document, and it helps inform decisions that the city makes. And, our Department of Parks and Recreation does have funding to acquire land and to seek out places to put in new parks. So I think this plan guidance will definitely help with giving guidance as the city makes decisions on where acquisitions and new parks could occur. I hope I got to everything in that question.
All right, next question also for you, Liz. This comes from Adam, who's asking about affordable housing and homelessness, and says, why do we continue to pay for homeless sweeps when we should be dealing with this at the systematic level? Having free transitional housing should be a cornerstone of this.
Thank you for that great question, Adam. We didn't touch on it yet in this meeting, but we do have recommendations about increasing the amount of transitional housing, supportive housing within the East area, because we do see that is a great need, particularly in the East Colfax neighborhood, where we have a number of motels kind of serving as de facto transitional housing. So that is a recommendation in the plan, and we do also have a section on social services and how we can better serve and help our populations that are experiencing homelessness. So that is in the plan, and if you go to that economy and housing chapter that starts on page 45, you can see some of those recommendations.
Great, thank you, Liz. Next question is from David Myers, and Stephen Riho, I'm going to ask you this question here. There's a lot of concern about pedestrian safety, and can you talk a little bit about some of the recommendations that we have in the East Area Plan that really cater to the pedestrian, specifically about improving some of the safety along 13th, 14th, and 17th Avenue?
Yeah, definitely, and thanks for the question, David. As we've touched on a little bit earlier, these parallel corridors were brought up a lot in the process. And so focusing improvements for both safety of all street users and using some of those traffic calming tactics that we spoke about are some of the items that we're doing, but also exploring things such as, are there near-term improvements we can do to these streets so we don't have to wait for more formal things. So looking at everything from spot improvements to intersections and larger scale improvements in the corridors.
All right, thanks, Stephen. Next question, I'll direct to Kurt. We've gotten a few questions about the goal of preserving the historic character of the area. I'll read this one from John. Can you explain how the designations area of historic interest and area of historic significance came to be added to this plan and how they'll impact potential rezoning recommendations?
Yeah, thanks for that question, John. So yeah, we do recommend that historically significant structures, whether those be homes or commercial buildings, be preserved. And we have a variety of recommendations on how to do that. And particularly with the recommendation to integrate new housing options in the neighborhoods, what the recommendation says is that we look at neighborhoods and do a survey that considers building ages, and other historical features such as architectural elements, and use those as a way to guide those decisions on integrating new housing forms. So if there are historically significant properties, the best way to preserve a historically significant property is by a historic designation. But there are other recommendations that we put in the plan in addition to historic designations, such as only allowing new housing options if the house is preserved, historically preserved, which means restricting it from demolition. So that's some of the ways that we've made those recommendations to fit in with that historic character.
And if I could just add briefly, there is a map in the plan. I don't have the exact page, but it's in the land use section that starts on page 19. And the difference there between the areas of historic significance and interest, significance means that there's already been some historic surveying done of those areas. The interest are where we know that we have older building stock. So that's just some distinction with that map.
Great, thank you, Liz. Just combing through the comments here, we are seeing a few comments about some of the affordable housing recommendations. And so Liz, I was hoping that maybe just generally, I know we've kind of touched on this a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about some of those affordable housing recommendations? And specifically, are there any recommendations along some of the major arterials in the plan area and what that might look like?
So the main recommendation that's kind of geography-based is that recommendation for height. So only allowing additional height if we achieve community benefits, and affordable housing is the priority for that. And if you go to our housing section, you'll see that we have some criteria around the affordable housing, and one that we wanted to help solve that, that shortage that we see in the East area, particularly for low and very low income households. The other recommendations that don't specifically apply to a particular corridor, but we do have recommendations, as I mentioned, about preserving existing affordable housing. We have a number of older apartment buildings, rental houses that are not restricted in any way in terms of a guarantee that they stay affordable. We have strategies about how we could potentially help convert some of those into affordable housing. We have recommendations for continuing to look as the city or with partners on acquiring property and converting that into, or building new affordable housing, looking to use, say, the DURA, the TIF tool, so the tax increment financing, to help with providing new affordable housing. So there's a number of recommendations, and they don't necessarily say they have to happen on the corridor. They could happen throughout the East area.
All right. Thanks, Liz. Here's another question for Kurt from Gretchen. Who decides what is, quotes, primarily single unit? This is critical and could be very subjective depending on who's deciding.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that question, Gretchen. And so that is intended to accomplish the goal in Blueprint Denver, which is to integrate new units into neighborhoods, but not completely change neighborhoods away from low density or low intensity character. And so that language, admittedly, it is general, but as I mentioned previously in the presentation, that area plans are guides. They're not regulations. And so that's not something you would see in regulatory language, for example, but it is a guiding statement that you would see in an area plan. And so the intention behind that primarily single unit is to achieve that balance of integrating new units and preserving single unit in those single unit areas as they are today. And so who will decide specifically to your question? Well, ultimately, it's a city council decision when we get to that point, but we have quite a few steps before we get to that point. And so the East Area Plan, when the East Area Plan is adopted, it'll provide the guidance of new regulatory changes. And we also have a project that's looking specifically at our low density areas and improving design quality and integrating new housing options that is scheduled to kick off late summer, early fall, that will be looking at this question from a regulatory standpoint and looking at the specific code language that will implement these recommendations. And they'll be looking at that not just in the East area, but throughout the entire city. And as part of that project, different plans will be consulted, including the East Area Plan and other neighborhood plans, as well as Blueprint Denver, on how to craft that regulatory language and what guidance the plans provide. And that regulatory language will be crafted. There'll be community input into that regulatory language. And then ultimately, that'll be presented to City Council for adoption on if we got it right.
Okay, before we move to another question, we're right at 6:58 already. So I wanted to just touch on, you know, I think we can probably stay about 10 minutes over for those who want to stay and ask additional questions or hear some additional responses. But I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we will be putting this recording again up on our website, and we will be answering all the questions and having an updated FAQ that will be on the website. You can visit our website and review and comment on the draft online. There is on the website, you can watch a video with my lovely voice telling you how to navigate through the commenting platform. And if you don't want to use that, you can feel free to reach out to us and email us your comments. If you need help or you know of someone that needs help accessing the plan, whether that's they don't have internet access and they need a paper copy, we are happy to help facilitate that. We're also happy to have a virtual meeting with your organization or with you. We want to make this as easy as possible for people to participate. And you know, as social distancing allows, we will look for opportunities to have smaller in-person meetings. And you can sign up to get updates for additional opportunities, again, on our website, and that's denvergov.org/eastplan. So I'll let, for those who need to sign off now, thank you again for joining us, and I think we'll just answer a few more questions. So let's throw it back to Scott and Jason.
Great, thank you, Liz. Kurt, quick question for you from Ken Stewart concerning the height map. He was wondering if you can explain what the public height priority area is. What does that mean? Or excuse me, the public park priority area.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. So as I mentioned previously, we are recommending that if there's any height proposed by a property owner that's beyond what their current zoning allows, that certain community benefits be required as part of that proposal. And the top priority that we are recommending is affordable housing. But there is one exception, and that exception is in the Mayfair Town Center. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that that's the only location where we think we can provide a meaningful public park space because of the lot sizes. And secondly, it's a flood zone area. And so there's an opportunity to provide some flood control with a public park at that location. So what you're seeing on that map that says a public park priority area is in the Mayfair Town Center area. And we've denoted that's the primary community benefit if additional height is requested in the Mayfair Town Center area.
All right. Here's a question for Liz from Nicholas. Has cottage house zoning or smaller lot sizes been looked at? Most single-family scrape and rebuilds result in much larger and less affordable single-family homes. Could smaller lots result in more density while still maintaining single-family character?
Great, thank you. Great question. Yes, so we do know that that has been a trend, right? Because our current zoning today kind of allows for much larger houses than what we see in much of the east area. So the result is often a more affordable single unit home being scraped in a larger, much less affordable single unit home being put in its place. So we are recommending that we look at our zoning to kind of right size it and make sure that we're not kind of incentivizing those larger, more expensive homes, and that so that helps with preserving our neighborhood character, but also preserving some of that affordability that we see. So make it easier for people to do additions and not do the scrape to the larger one. And then secondly, with the recommendation that Kurt has discussed about integrating more housing options, we absolutely do believe, and you can see in the plan on that land use section that starts on page 19, some examples of types of housing that could fit in different housing forms that we could evaluate during our regulatory process. So that's a process that would follow this plan to write zoning to allow, but that there could be other types of housing that fit into neighborhoods that are smaller units that are kind of inherently more affordable for some households. And we are recommending that regulatory process evaluate affordability as we write those rules.
Great, thank you, Liz. I have a transportation question here, and I think I'll start with Ryan Billings. Anne is asking us, is this area plan dependent on RTD and mass transit changes? And what financial due diligence is being done on RTD as it has struggled to complete light rail projects and retain drivers?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think the plan dependency question is probably a better question for Kurt to answer. I think the answer is it's not dependent on the BRT, as there's a lot of aspects to the plan that cover a lot of different things outside of what we're thinking from a BRT standpoint. As it relates to the question for RTD, obviously up to this point, and even more so now, the financial struggles of RTD are real and will continue to be a bit of an issue. I will say that one of the things that we're working on and why the city is leading this effort and not RTD is this is our plan. This is the city's plan in coordination with RTD, CDOT, FTA, City of Aurora, and DRCOG. And currently, RTD doesn't have any financial piece of this. They're not providing any funding from a capital standpoint. They will be providing the service, very similar to how they provide the service now. But the capital stack or the funding associated with building this out is going to fall squarely on partnerships and coordination amongst the agencies that I listed, but mostly a process that will work with for FTA, CIG funding, or small starts funding.
I could just do a real quick follow-up, sorry, on the dependency question. And I would say, yes, I mean, the purpose of the plan is to one of the purposes of the plan is to coordinate land use changes with infrastructure. And so, you know, if for some reason any infrastructure, including BRT, is delayed or something happens, we do have the ability with plan language in the plan as it's currently drafted to adjust to that. But we are operating under the basis that the plan is moving forward. We do have, or the BRT project specifically is moving forward. We do have funding for that project, as Mike mentioned previously in the presentation.
And I just wanted to add too that you know, a lot of our recommendations are really based on community goals that we heard throughout this process, and the basis that the 15 and 15L are already providing great transit service. This has the highest ridership, I believe, in RTD system, and it already is one of the best connection points. So we do feel like it is a benefit to have residents be able to live close to that transit today, and it will only get better with BRT.
This is Ryan again. I want to highlight kind of that, what you just said, Liz. The 15 and the 15L individually as routes are the highest ridership corridors in the entire RTD system, more so than the Flatiron Flyer and other services, except for the mall and some of the light rail and commuter rail lines. And the issue isn't that there isn't enough service out there. The issue is that those buses are getting stuck and they're not operating efficiently. And the whole transit enhancement vision that was developed over the last 8 years was geared towards kind of making those improvements to make sure that those buses are operating as efficiently as possible. So I just wanted to make sure that was very clear.
And one clarification, this is Mike Gill, the project manager for the Colfax BRT. We do have funding for the next phase. The funding for complete implementation will be fleshed out in that next phase. We need to advance some of the design, figure out exactly what the specific cost estimates will be, and then apply for funding and that sort of thing. So there's a number of steps to go through, but we do have funding to move through the next phase and implement a portion of the BRT at a minimum.
All right. We've gotten a few questions about the Mayfair Town Center, the proposed park in the Mayfair Town Center, including from Clinton. So if you could address where that park would be, do we have funding to build the park, and what would happen to the potential parking that could be eliminated by putting a park in there? I'll direct that to Liz, I guess.
Great, thank you for that question. We can't dictate exactly where that park would be. We do think that the grocery store parking lots that we have two of next to each other along 14th and at Cremeria there would be great opportunities. And they do kind of align with that low spot where we see a lot of flooding. So we do think that those locations in particular could be a great place to achieve that park of a larger size. Of course, this would be something that would involve the private property owners working together with the city. We do think this could be kind of a partnership with both, you know, our Department of Parks and Recreation, as I mentioned, that they do have some funding to help with acquisitions, and also with our stormwater management group, who is actively and always looking for ways to help address our stormwater and flooding issues. So we see that as a potential partnership, and we think that the incentive to allow additional height in that area could help bring a property owner to the table. And we absolutely would need to figure out what happens with parking there, how we kind of how new development would happen along that site. But we think that there is a great opportunity, and we wanted to be clear about that in the plan.
Great, thank you, Liz, and other panelists for that. Liz, I want to do a time check with you. So before we run out of time, do you want to talk quickly about how the public can keep up to date?
Great. I'll just touch on this again, and maybe we can take one more question after this. Again, and any questions we didn't get to, thanks so much for submitting them. We will respond to all of them after the meeting. And again, this recording will be available on the website if you want to watch it again or share it with any of your neighbors. And again, you can use our website to review and comment on the draft plan. We have instructions for how to do that on the website, and you can reach out to us to provide those comments, or if you'd like to schedule a phone call or just talk about ways that we can help you access the plan or get answers to your questions. So thank you again so much for participating tonight. I know we all find these times challenging, and thank you for taking the time to and spending it with us tonight. Maybe just one more question.
Sure. So one more question here. We've talked a little bit about missing middle housing, and a few folks are asking about guidance in the plan specific to ADUs, and ADUs are accessory dwelling units. So Kurt, would you like to talk a little bit about that, and also maybe touch on some of the guidance that we might also find in Blueprint Denver, the city's comprehensive plan?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that. So, yeah, the Blueprint Denver citywide plan was adopted by City Council last year. And one of the recommendations in that plan as a way to achieve a more inclusive city is to allow homeowners the option to add an accessory dwelling unit. And for those who don't know what an ADU is, or accessory dwelling unit, is a small secondary unit, usually in your backyard. Sometimes it's above a garage. Sometimes it's just within the house itself, like in a basement. And so those can provide additional housing options in neighborhoods. And Blueprint Denver recommends pretty clearly that those should be allowed to any homeowner throughout the city who wants to build one. And so that is carried forward in the East Area Plan, and it's echoing basically what Blueprint Denver says, is that the accessory dwelling units should be encouraged. We do have some additional recommendations in the plan that helps guide ADUs. We do want them to fit in well with the neighborhoods, the unique character of these neighborhoods, and so establishing some form, mass, height, scale standards for ADUs. We also want to make sure that they are affordable, and again, that existing homeowners have the ability to implement those if they like. And so connecting folks with financial resources, technical resources, that can be sometimes very difficult to build those. And so for existing homeowners to be able to take advantage of that policy, we have some recommendations on how we could we can help with that.
Great. Thanks, Kurt. I think we're at 7:15 now, so we're going to go ahead and end the Q&A. Again, we will, as I have said many times, we will make sure that we respond to all those questions and get them up on our website so you're able to review those, and we will put the recording up. So feel free to send us additional questions that you didn't get to ask tonight as well. And please review and comment on that draft plan and reach out to us on how we can help you with the review of it, or if you'd like to schedule a meeting with us. And as always, and I think probably most of you are on our email list, but do sign up to get updates on our website, denvergov.org/eastplan, because you will hear about additional opportunities as they come up. And again, thank you very much for your time tonight. We appreciate it, and have a good evening.